Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in to TV Courtroom, hosted by yours truly, attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael X, aka the angriest black man in America, aka Denzel Washington, aka Idris Elba. We got a great show today with some great guests. Two topics we're going to be focusing on. If we have time, I'm going to add a few more, but the main two are the following. One, driving while black. What does that mean? Well, it means exactly what it says, driving while black. And what happens to black men and black women and black boys and black girls and black others anytime they're in a motor vehicle? Well, thankfully, we have two experts who are going to tell you what they have done to help you get home safely after you drive while black. Or in the case of passengers, ride while black. Who are those two experts? One is preeminent city councilman Isaiah Thomas. He's the one who started this firestorm for people who are not progressive, people who are not enlightened. They consider it a negative thing, but believe me, it's a positive thing. And what's that thing? Well, it's the brainchild of city councilman at large, Isaiah Thomas. It's called the Driving Equality Bill. And the Driving Equality Bill deals with the issue of driving while black. You're going to find out about that legislation, what it means, and maybe more important, what it does not mean. Because there's a lot of hate going on by the haters who spread hateful lies. Stay tuned and hear from City Councilman Isaiah Thomas. Joining the councilman is preeminent attorney extraordinaire, I might add, Troy H. Wilson. Troy Wilson has been practicing law, both criminal and civil, for over 30 years. And he has sponsored an upcoming event called Driving While Black. And when I say an upcoming event, it's actually a lecture of sorts, a seminar of sorts. It's a forum of sorts, and it's free, actually. It's online where Troy Wilson, along with City Councilman Isaiah Thomas, and yours truly, the three of us will be talking to you about driving while black. We'll tell you what the law is relative to that, and we'll tell you what you can do to protect yourself, your loved ones, and other folks who are connected with you. So that's the first topic of the day, driving while black. Stay tuned. And by the way, those of you who tuned in early, call your family, call your friends, text them, email them, whatever you need to do, and let them know that they need to check out today's TV courtroom show. I did say there's another topic, at least one other topic. Many of you have probably heard about Kevin Hart when he was in Egypt, I believe about a week or so ago, and doing his comedy thing. And during one of his routines, he talked about ancient Africans being as black as him. And even though he's a comedian, and even though it was part of a joke, he was very serious about that. Now, clearly, Kevin Hart is not a scholar, not by any stretch of the imagination. But he was right on point when he mentioned that ancient Africans were as black as he is, as black as I am. Well, the folks who currently reside in Egypt, who are not the original inhabitants, whose skin is lighter and whose hair is straighter, they went ballistic. I mean, they went off on him as if he was trying to attack them, as if he was trying to insult them. And because Kevin Hart is not a scholar in African history, he's not the person to explain from an intellectual standpoint what he actually meant when he said original Egyptians were black. Ancient Egyptians were black. But guess who is an intellectual? Guess who is a scholar? In fact, guess who is the greatest international African-centered scholar? You guessed it, Dr. Molefe Kete Asante. Well, Dr. Asante heard about the backlash against Kevin Hart, and because Kevin Hart needed some intellectual backup, some intellectual ammunition, guess who came running? You're right, Dr. Molefi Kete Asante, former chairman of the Africology department at Temple University and the author of 100. I didn't misspeak, I said 100. 100 books. Think about that. Dr. Asante wrote 100 books. Most people haven't even read 100 books. Dr. Asante, the greatest African-centered scholar alive, has written 100 books. He's going to be on with us today to prove to you that Kevin Hart was right. The ancient Africans were Black. And if we have time, folks, we're going to talk about the May primary. Obviously, we're still in June. In fact, it's the first week of June, Friday, June. I keep saying June. I meant January. We're obviously January. In fact, the first week of January, January 6th to be exact. But in 5 months, in 4 months actually, May of 2023, and then followed by November of 2023, there's going to be some big elections. I know many of you think that elections only take place every 4 years. Nothing could be further from the truth. Did you know that elections take place every 6 months? We won't get into all the nitty-gritty about elections today, but I will say this. This is January 6, 2023. In 4 months, that will take us to May 2023. There'll be the May primary. And after that, there'll be the November general election. And in the May primary, as you know, candidates from different parties jockey for position, decide who's going to be the nominee or the representative for certain positions in the Democratic Party, and same thing for the Republican Party. And whoever wins in May for the Democratic primary, whoever wins in May for the Republican primary, they go head to head in the general election in November. Well, there's a lot of offices available. I know you hear mostly about the mayor. That's true. There's city council, there's the sheriff, and there's several others. But you know what's most important to me, most influential? The judicial positions. There are lawyers running to become judges of the Court of Common Pleas. There are lawyers running for positions to become judges of municipal court. That's in the May primary, 4 months from now. And then we got the November general election. That's where those people who won in the primary run in the general election to decide who's going to be the judge. But check this out. In addition to that, in November, in the general election, there's something called retention elections. So in addition to the other political offices and other candidates, there are sitting judges who have already been elected, who want to keep their positions, called their retention. It's an up or down vote. In other words, you'll see, for example, Judge Joe Blow. And the only question for Joe Blow will be yes or no. Yes, that judge should remain a judge for either 4 years or actually it's for 6 years for municipal court and 10 years for Court of Common Pleas. So the question for Judge Joe Blow is, should Joe Blow be retained in that position? Yes or no? And I got to tell you, there's one judge in particular who should not, it's probably several, but there's one judge in particular who should not be retained in the November election. Again, I'll talk more about all that stuff later. So the key topics today: 1, driving while Black, featuring 2 great panelists, including City Councilman at Large Isaiah Thomas, including Attorney Extraordinaire Troy H. Wilson. And we're going to spend approximately 15, 20 minutes or so on that topic. And then once we finish that, we hope to track down Dr. Molefi Kete Asante. Now, Dr. Asante, when you use the phrase globetrotter, international traveler, that's Dr. Asante. So we hope that we're able to get a hold of him. We hope that he's available. And if he is, we'll have him to talk about Kevin Hart's enlightened and factually correct statement that the ancient Egyptians were Black. So again, driving while Black, first topic. Second topic, were the ancient Egyptians Black, as comedian Kevin Hart said. those of you who check me out here at TV Courtroom, you should also be aware that in addition, I host a show called the Radio Courtroom, which is somewhat similar to TV Courtroom, except you guessed it, it's on the radio. That's WURD 96.1 FM. That's WURD 96.1 FM every Saturday from 1 p.m. until 3 p.m. Once again, WURD 96.1 FM every Saturday from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock. And a lot of the stuff I talk about here at TV Courtroom, we talk about in much more detail on the Radio Courtroom. In addition to all that, I also write a column, 2 columns to be exact, one every Sunday called Freedom's Journal. Every Sunday, check out my column called Freedom's Journal in the Philadelphia Tribune. And the first Tuesday of each month, I write a separate column. And that separate column is Black Dollars Matter. All in the Tribune, you can find the old stuff, the current stuff, the new stuff. Simply go to phillytrib.com. That's phillytrib.com. And thanks to our producer extraordinaire, Roland, you see up there, phillytrib.com. Just go to that site, just type in the name Cord, C-O-R-D, and whatever you want to get information about police brutality, presidential election, mayoral politics, district attorney of Philadelphia, racism, any of that stuff, it's all there. And again, we're lining up our guests, and we hope to have them as on time as we expected. But as you know, because we got a city councilman, he could be doing anything. We hope he's able to get to us. You know, they meet and do what they have to do all the time. We know we have attorney Troy Wilson. So in about a minute or so, we're going to get started. But those of you who are checking us out, please contact family and friends by phone, by text, by email, and say, hey, that guy, who's that guy? Yours truly, attorney Michael Cord, AKA Michael X, AKA the angriest Black man in America, AKA Denzel Washington, AKA Idris Elba, is hosting his show on the first Friday of each month called TV Courtroom from 3:30 p.m. until 4:30 p.m. And like I said, we've got a whole bunch to talk about. So let's do this. We expect, and we, in fact, almost sure, unless there's some emergency going on in City Hall, that we will get City Councilman Isaiah Thomas. But let's get going with that first topic so we can get all the information to you and don't have to rush through it. Let's start with the first of our 2 panelists, and that's my good friend, Troy H. Wilson. And the thing I love about Troy is this. Far too often, I meet Black lawyers who are lawyers first and Black second. But Troy Wilson and I come from the school whereby we say, I'm not a lawyer who happens to be a Black man. Instead, I'm a Black man who just happens to be a lawyer. And because we take that approach, we fight the good fight for Black people. As my mentor, the great Charles Bowser, used to say, although it's good to fight the good fight, it's even better to win the good fight. And that's what Troy Wilson's been doing for more than 3 decades, about 33 years. So I'm going to bring Troy Wilson up. And, you know, if I talked about his resume, I'd be talking for the next, 3 or 4 days. So I'm going to let him spend about 30 seconds talking about his background. Let me just say this. Although he's a great lawyer, he's a greater Black man first. And you'll be, once he breaks it down to you, you'll understand why I took that point. There's also something called the Restorative Justice Project. And you probably heard about it nationwide, you've heard about it statewide, regional. But if you ask me, I'd say that the real force behind restorative justice, arguably nationally, but certainly locally, is Troy Wilson. Troy, just talk a little bit about yourself with your fancy Ivy League degrees and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll get into what you've been doing for the past 33 years. And then we'll jump right into this brain child of yours called Driving While Black. But a little bit about your background, then we'll get into the topic.
Right, no problem, no doubt, Mike. Basically, I was born in New York City in the South Bronx. So I grew up in the hood, grew up in the projects, actually. From there, I did the prep school thing, went to Brown University. And after graduating from Brown, I immediately arrived in Philadelphia in the early 80s, 83, for Temple. Graduated from Temple, met this honey from North Philadelphia who turned out she was also a lawyer, and fell in love, got married, and then daughter was born in 88. We started our law firm in 1988. And here we are, fast forward 34 years later. We've still together, still married, still have the law firm, one of the longest tenured Black-owned law firms in Philadelphia history. And we're doing what we do right now. Helping Black people, basically, is what we've been doing for the last 30 some odd years in many capacities.
And speaking of your beautiful and scholarly wife, she probably didn't brag and tell you, but she saved my alumni association. I'm not going to go into the detail, but we had some issues and she came to our rescue. So we really appreciate that. So Troy, tell us first about why you care. I mean, a guy like you, Ivy League background, prominent attorney, doing all the good stuff in society. Why do you feel a need to continue to help Black people?
I mean, look, man, I had many opportunities to take that road, that in the fork in the road, I could have rolled and I know people who did that, and I just never wanted to do it. It wasn't the way I was raised. My mother raised me. My mother was how do I put this? Supporting, she called herself a Black Panther, all right? So that was the environment that I was raised in. So I had expectations as a Black boy, a Black teenager, a Black young man, and a Black man to give back and to do certain things. So because I love my mother, I'm going to honor that Black woman. That's one of the main reasons. I love Black people. So I have a duty to protect Black people when I can. And I do that in the capacity of my job. So does my wife. We built our whole life doing that. Professionally and private and in private as well. So this is just a manifestation of what I've always been doing. Even when I was in law school at Temple, I used to give free law classes to the community when I was my first and second and third year in law school. So this is just an outbreak of that. I have a lot more knowledge now and a lot more information, which means I have a lot more power. So what I want to do is take this power and give it back to my people so that they too are empowered and can hopefully protect themselves in situations when they're dealing with police who stop them in their automobiles.
Before we get into the specifics of the upcoming community program that you put together, it's your baby, Driving While Black, what is restorative justice and what's your role in that here in Philadelphia?
Well, restorative justice as a principle is something that I'll just break it down real simple. It's like, what do we do?
And by the way, folks need to understand when he said break it down simple, he's talking about Brother Malcolm, who's right there. Brother Malcolm would always say, make it plain. And that's exactly, despite the fact that he's got all the experience, education, he's going to do what Brother Malcolm said and make this restorative justice concept plain. Please continue.
Right. So basically, it's the way I used it is a way to keep as many Black people out of the grind of mass incarceration as possible, trying to resolve cases and empower our communities to resolve issues that begin in our communities, to let them stay in our communities through face-to-face resolution and mediation and things like that, so that the community retains the power over issues that happen in their community and the community resolves it with the wrongdoer. That's essentially what, without police intervention, without judicial intervention, without parole officers, without probation officers, without DAs, without defense counsel. It is the community doing it, okay? That's ultimately what restorative justice is. It is a way to combat mass incarceration, the system that loves to just lock Black people up indiscriminately. And we wanted to find a way to kind of like stem the tide. And we were able to successfully do that with a certain type of case here in Philadelphia.
We do have Councilman Thomas about to join us, but Troy, as you were talking about that, I said, it sounds like such a great concept and you made it plain. Spend about 30 seconds talking about the practical application. What happened recently with the protest and the hundreds of folks who were arrested? And there were some folks who said, hey, these are thugs, these are criminals, they engage in felonious crimes, they committed burglaries, let's lock them up and throw away the key. And you said, maybe not. Tell us how that benefits not only the defendants, but the business owners as well.
Well, in this situation, we had about 700 or 800 people locked up and arrested, protests and otherwise, for the George Floyd and the Wallace protests, right? So about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So, you know, I was just, you talk about you angry? I was angry because I knew what was going to happen, that all these Black bodies were going to be grinded through the system and have records for the rest of their lives. I also knew from my own experiences that most of these people arrested were young Black males. Yep. That's it, because that's usually the target area for the criminal justice system. So I said to myself, well, I'll be damned if we're going to try to deal at least with these cases to physically take save as many of these brothers, Harriet Tubmanize them, you know what I'm saying? Lead them out of degradation, away from the system into something else. So that's what yourself as well, Mike, don't downplay your input in this and other concerned attorneys.
I was going to throw that in. I was definitely going to throw that part in.
We got together and we were able to develop, I was the architect to develop a system to get those groups of people out of the system, as many as we could. Essentially what we did was we set up a system where we worked with the DA's office and the public defender's office to recognize the people who were arrested, what their charges were, and then we pressured the DA's office to work with us to develop the restorative justice program to take those people, put them back into the harmed communities, making sure that the businesses were given financial recompense for the damage that was done, but also allowing the business people to meet face to face with the people who were doing the harm. And both sides be able to talk out their differences without the intervention of the criminal legal system and all that entails, and the bias that can entail, the racism that can entail, implicit or otherwise. And the program worked. We also had, at the same time, we gave education to everyone who went through the program about what restorative justice is generally. And we tried to train as many of those folks who had been arrested to become restorative justice counselors and ambassadors, so that if something like this happens again, if there's a conflict, instead of using a gun, we get these people trained now who can go back into the community and they can help to train other people to resolve conflicts in our community without the benefit of police, without the benefit of probation or the criminal law system. Okay, so that was the other thing. The other thing is we had some people arrested who ain't have food in their belly, who didn't have a job, didn't have job training. We found Jeff Brown gave us 200 jobs for people in this program. 200 for them. We had a group at Temple, nonprofit, E3 is what it's called, that did free job training, free job placement. We had people, if you needed food in your belly, we had food banks prepared to give food to people at the same time, because you can't do things the right way if you ain't got no food in your stomach. You can't do things the right way if you don't have a roof over your head. You can't do things the right way if you don't have a job or you don't have job training. So we provided all of those services at the same time that we were getting the community together with the so-called wrongdoers and having them work out their differences while being trained so that they could become restorative justice counselors as well. So that's essentially what we did. The success rate was, last thing real quick, Mike, the success was higher than expected. Even the DA said the recidivism rate of the people in our program, 5%. That's it. That means 95% of the people in our program never went back into the criminal law system again. Never. Behind this program.
Is powerful. It's one thing to punish a quote unquote criminal. It makes much more sense to change the so-called criminal, because you can lock him up, throw him in jail 2 or 3 years. He comes back, lock him up, throw him in jail 2 or 3 years. Why don't you make him a productive member of society? And that's exactly what you've done with your ingenious concept and restorative justice.
Mike, one really quick thing, Mike. Just want to add. The other thing that we did for every one of these people who went into this program, we got them expungements. So at the end of the day, they ain't got a record. No one can see a record. A future employer can type that name up and nothing will come up because their record has been expunged. That was an agreement that we had with the DA's office that, hey, if our clients go through this program and they successfully complete this restorative justice program, You're going to agree on your end to dismiss all charges, and you're going to agree on your end, if they successfully complete the program, to agree to an expungement so that they don't have a record. So that was done as well.
Very well said, but more important, Troy, very well done. Kudos for that. Somebody tell me you're running for mayor or something. We'll talk more about that later. But let's do this. We did have the councilman on, but I understand that there were some technical problems, so we lost him. We're trying to get him back. So let's just jump into it. What is this thing that you organized, this Driving While Black community update? Is it a seminar? Is it a forum? Is it a session? Does it cost $1,000? Tell us more about it.
Well, the information that we're giving out costs tens of thousands of dollars, if we're being honest. However, this program is totally, purely, 100% free for all applicants, registrants. All you got to do is register, and it's free for you. It's webinar based. There it is. Thank you, Mike, for putting that up on the screen.
I love to take credit. I love to take credit, Troy. But that's our producer extraordinaire, Roland. Every time he hears key phrases, he just jumps to it. So he did that. But go ahead, Troy.
My man. Go ahead, Roland. Thank you. One of my closest friends' name, by the way. Good brother.
Okay.
At any rate, so basically it's free registration. It's a free webinar, Zoom-based webinar on Monday, this upcoming Monday from 6:30 to 4:30 p.m. We're going to have myself talking about the current state of the Pennsylvania law. Pennsylvania law has changed drastically in the last year or so, 2 years, and it affords actually greater protection for citizens, specifically for Black folks. This seminar is primarily designed for Black people to try to arm yourself and protect yourself. So we're going to deal with that. I'm going to talk about the law. I'm going to break it down so everybody can understand it, but we're going to talk about the law. We got Councilman Thomas who's going to talk about the groundbreaking ordinance that he helped push through City Council, first of its kind in the country, that talks about driving equity for everyone, but I'm going to focus on specifically on people that look like us, people of color. Then we're going to, Michael Court is going to round it out talking about what do we do when we are stopped by police? What are our rights generally? What things can we do to protect ourselves even before we get into the car? What can we do before we turn that key on that ignition and start that car to protect ourselves? Those kinds of practical things. So we're giving you the law. We're giving you the law at the local level. We're giving you the state law to protect yourself. And we're giving you the how-tos to put all of that stuff together for our community, okay?
And as Troy was talking, you see Roland put up on the screen how you can register for this. And for those of you who get confused and intimidated by technology, you all can email me and I'll definitely send you the hyperlink. Email me at michaelcordx@gmail.com. That's michaelcordx@gmail.com. In addition, you hear Troy Wilson talking about this today. He's going to be on the radio courtroom tomorrow, Saturday, as he was last Saturday talking about it. And you're going to see him along with Councilman Isaiah Thomas in the Philadelphia Tribune. So we're trying to put this information out there. Troy, you talked about the law. Again, making it plain, like Brother Malcolm said. Tell us about a couple of decisions that protect us a little more today than in the past.
Well, the major one is called Commonwealth versus Alexander. It's a Pennsylvania Supreme Court case. Basically, what the community needs to know is, and I'm going to go into a little bit more depth about it on Monday, is that cops cannot just roll up on you now and just search your car willy-nilly. Even if the cops had probable cause to stop you, they need something else. They need something called—
What's probable cause?
Probable cause is that the police have they have reason to believe that there or a reasonable expectation that a crime is committed or is about to be committed by you.
So it can't be mere suspicion because you're wearing a— Okay.
No, sir. It cannot be mere suspicion. Okay. So now, because of the Alexander case, the cops, there's a two-part equation. The first part that the cops need is probable cause. But they got to have the second part or else they cannot search your car. They're supposed to let you go. The second part is an exigent circumstance. All that means is, hey, man, there's some emergency that is so serious that the cop can't let you go and just get on their phone like they normally do, by the way, and secure a search warrant from a judge. Otherwise, the law says if the police don't have one or the other, they either got to let you go or they got to get your consent or whatever they see they can take. Or if not, they need a search warrant. okay? If they don't have a search warrant, then even if they find something and it's not in plain view, for example, it's in your trunk, for example, and they search your trunk without your consent, okay?
I was going to ask you about that. Before you go on, what does consent mean and why should you never give it?
Consent means that you are giving up your constitutional right at the state level and at the federal level to your right to be free from all unreasonable searches and seizures. You're saying to the police, I'm giving up that legal right, that constitutional right. You can go ahead and search my car. And like you said, Mike, never, ever give up that right. People died for you to have that right. There's no need in the world for you to say to yourself, oh, I'm going to make it easier on this police officer. Let me give my consent to search this car. Because sometimes police will actually not have probable cause or exigent circumstances, but they get that consent from you. Then they can search your car. Then if they find something, you're giving me a harder time to go as your attorney. Okay? So the other thing I try to tell clients all the time is, hey, man, make my job a little bit easier.
Yes.
Make it easier for me to use my ability for my legal expertise to help you. Don't help them cops. Help yourself. And help yourself help me. Put your case on.
You sound just like me. I always say to my clients, give me something to work with. Give me something to work with because you're making it too easy for the opponent. You talked about the Alexander case. What's the other development in the law?
Well, there's one called Commonwealth versus Ruffin, and it's about, there was a case that came down and actually appealed by Krasner's office, which was a bit of a surprise. That basically said, hey, there's for the license plate, there's a license plate that covers your license plate. And if it's smudged or something like that, the police can say, they used to be able to say, hey, we can stop that person, and that allows us part of the probable cause for the equation. And it was Krasner who lost the case and who filed the appeal. Krasner's office filed the appeal, and the appellate court agreed with them. What bothered me about that is because I knew that if the police have an in, they're going to focus and target primarily Black and brown people with any in that they have that they can utilize at their discretion, and that was problematic. However, there's state legislation that was recently passed to take that right of the police to stop you on that basis, to just take it away, so that the police now don't have that as a basis to stop you now. And that was the Ruffin case. That was the Ruffin case.
Those of you who are listening to the voice of Troy H. Wilson. By the way, I've been knowing this guy for, 25, 30 years and have no idea what the H stands for, but he'll tell us by the time this show ends. Troy Wilson, great attorney. You can see the intellectual force behind an upcoming community update called Driving While Black, taking place this Monday, January 9th at 6:30. And Roland will put up on the screen the information as to how you can register, because you must register. Roland has done his job again. So please, folks, register for this program. It can literally save your life. Having said that, I believe we have City Councilman Isaiah Thomas with us. We had some technical difficulties, but we're back. Councilman, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. I apologize. My internet has been up or down where I'm at right now, so I do apologize for that.
No need to apologize. Troy Wilson has been doing the right thing, and he could have kept talking for the next 2 hours. So we're going to pass the baton right to you. Tell us, what is this driving equality ordinance that you initiated and got through City Council? As Troy pointed out, the first of its kind, not just in Philly, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationwide. What is, and by the way, I'm going to tell folks on the TV courtroom what I told you on the radio courtroom. You're a father first, Councilman, so you got family stuff going on, daddy stuff going on, and we expect you to do your daddy thing first. So if you want to bring the kids into the camera, we can have this party together. But just jump right into it.
Well, that's going to be up to my 2-year-old to decide if he's going to come on board or not.
I hear you.
But, it's a different one every time.
So not only what it is, but maybe more important, what it's not.
So I think that it's important to understand what it's not, honestly. And we'll start with what it is. Driving equality is legislation that my office worked collaboratively with the mayor, with the police department, with the public defender's office, and other community stakeholders to put together what we felt like was an initiative to improve the relationship between law enforcement and communities of color, as well as to be more efficient as a police department. So what we did was we looked at, for example, driving without a seatbelt on. If you are in the city of Philadelphia and you're driving without a seatbelt on, that is a motor vehicle code violation that's enforced once you've been pulled over for another violation, like speeding or running a red light or, running a stop sign or driving recklessly, or if police have probable cause for the vehicle you're driving. So we decided to look at other classifications that could possibly be used in racial discrimination cases to try to put ourselves in a position to be able to say that these classifications too would be enforced the same way we enforce a seatbelt, or the same way we enforce, let's say, expired registration or expired admission and inspection stickers by like a PPA officer. And so the 8 different motor vehicle code violations that we looked at were admission and inspection stickers. We did a 60-day grace period on registration, which was originally a 30-day grace period. And that's partly because of COVID and some of the inconveniences of COVID as well, too. We also looked at minor damage to the bumper. We looked at the relocation of the license plate. We looked at something dangling from your mirror because that, was a very controversial one. And we looked at minor damage to the bumper as well as one tail light being out. So at the end of the day, these motor vehicle code violations are now enforced by a ticket, in the sense of it could be a PPA officer. It could be somebody who was speeding or driving recklessly or committing some other type of crime, and they also have this motor vehicle code violation, and that violation will be enforced. And so we're really proud of the legislation because, number one, it makes police departments number one, it addresses the issue of prejudice against predominantly Black men and men of color. Number two, it makes the police department more efficient. And number three, it makes us more efficient as a city. We're proud of the fact that this is legislation that people are looking to replicate all across the country. And like I started the conversation with, is understanding what it's not. We're seeing a huge increase as it relates to fake license plates. The Inquirer recently did a report on it. And even in their story, they said in their story that this problem that we're seeing is not equated to driving equality. One has nothing to do with the other. We also know that there's a huge issues as it relates to crime across the city of Philadelphia. Folks need to understand that this law went into enforcement in March of 2022. So some of the spikes that we've seen in homicides, some of the spikes that we've seen in carjackings, some of the spikes that we've seen in hit and runs, all those things started well before driving equality was enforced. So one would say, Councilman, if we're facing all these issues, why would you want to enforce this right now? Great question. Because when we're looking at the justices or the injustice as it relates to Black people and people of color, why is it always a delay? I'm 38 years old. There's always been a crime crisis in this city. We've always seen issues as it relates to poverty and terrible schools. I don't think that we should delay the rights of Black men and Black folks and people of color all across the city of Philadelphia because we haven't found solutions to systemic problems. Are we going to continue to work on those systemic problems? Absolutely. But we need to understand that we could walk and chew gum at the same time. So we could fight against poverty. We could fight for quality education and equality wages. But we could also simultaneously pass laws and put us in a position to be able to address some of the injustices that exist, especially when we know the methods that create those injustices don't work, like stop and frisk, when it's done in an unconstitutional way, which we've seen a ton of. I'll stop by saying this. I was really disturbed when I watched the video on social media recently, and it talked about, it was a young man who was in the midst of being stopped and searched by the police. And one of the things the young man said, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't want to be as graphic as he was, but he asked the police, he said, "You checked my private part, right?" The police officer said yes, and acknowledged that he checked his private part. The young man said, "And you didn't find anything, right?" And the police officer acknowledged that he didn't find anything. So the young man asked him to put some respect on his name and let him go. I don't know if that young man was committing a crime. I don't know if that young man had a gun. What I do know is, as a constituent in the city of Philadelphia, I don't feel safer because a law enforcement person decided to check that young man's private part. And that's the part of the conversation that I always try to bring awareness around, because it's the stop, it's the search of the car, but it's also the humiliation that's involved in how the human is actually searching. For those Black men who are born and raised in the city of Philadelphia, we become immune to what it means to have an officer, do a swipe of your private part to search for some type of drugs, as if drugs in my private part is with creating all the crime across the city of Philadelphia. So I'll stop right there because, you know, I know the legislation is somewhat complicated. So I love to always take questions around driving equality, the legislation, and the work we're trying to do in Philadelphia.
Well said, and as I told Troy Wilson, well done. Let's do this. We're running out of time. We got to get to Dr. Molefe Asante, but I'm going to give you about 90 seconds, Councilman, for your closing statement. I want you to tell us, okay, you explained what this driving equality law is. How does that tie in to the upcoming discussion that we're going to have created by Troy Wilson, Driving While Black Community Update? How does your legislation and this upcoming community update work hand in hand, if they do?
Well, of course they do, because the legislation is grounded in data and the symposium is grounded in data. And the data tells us that while Black folks are, you know, around 40 to 50% of the population in the city of Philadelphia, well over 80% of the traffic stops. We're also 3 times more likely to be searched when we're actually pulled over. And we're actually less likely to have a weapon and or contraband on us when something is found. In neighborhoods where we make up less than 60% of the population, we still make up over 70% of the motor vehicle code stops, which means that even just passing through white neighborhoods, we're more likely to be pulled over and searched when we're less likely to have some type of weapon and or contraband on us. The last thing I'll say is that we spent about $21 million on lawsuits last year involving law enforcement, and a lot of those lawsuits starts with a traffic stop. So what can we do to become more efficient? What can we do to become more innovative? How can we use technology to enforce some of these motor vehicle code violations that we're seeing, and continue to improve an injustice that we know exists as it relates to how Black men are disproportionately pulled over? So the legislation has direct impact on the work that's being done and the conversations that are going to take place at the symposium. And we appreciate this issue being at the forefront because, you know, I showed you my 2-year-old son is here with me right now. I would love for him to grow up in a world where I don't have to talk to him about what happens or what to deal with or what he should do when he's pulled over, because it's inevitable, like it was for me and you and so many other Black men growing up in Philadelphia and across this country.
Very well said. That City Councilman Isaiah Thomas, he's going to be one of 3 of us who will be participating in Driving While Black, a community update, the brainchild of Troy Wilson, taking place this Monday, January 9, 6:30 p.m. Enrolling has already, and we'll again let you know how you can register for that. So follow those instructions. We got to get to Dr. Molefe Asante, but the final 90 seconds go to Troy Wilson. Troy, why should people care about this? People say, I don't carry drugs. I don't carry guns. I'm a law-abiding person. Why should I care about this? How does this affect me? Tell us why and how it does. And let's repeat again what's going to take place on Monday.
Listen, man, this thing affects everybody if you're Black. Even if you haven't been stopped by police in an automobile, you know someone. If you're Black, you definitely know someone who has, especially Black males. I know I've been stopped multiple times. So there's a trauma that comes about as a result of that. And I want our people to have to be armed with knowledge. Black knowledge is Black power, brother. And what we're trying to do is arm the community with knowledge to protect themselves so that we don't have incidents that happen in Minnesota and likewise from car stops. We can hopefully reduce those issues, deaths and otherwise that happen as a result of that. Listen, Mike, last thing is we could do a seminar on walking while Black, talking while Black, eating while Black, flying while Black, laying down while Black, meeting Blacks with Blacks while talking while Black. Okay, so all of this is part of a continuum. We're just getting started, by the way. This is an important one, but we're going to have more areas of empowerment and power and knowledge to give back to the community. And we will do so on Monday, January 9th, for this one particular area. It'll change your life, hopefully, and protect lives.
Very well said. And as pointed out before, Troy, very well done. We got to shift gears now. Thank you very much, folks. If you were impressed with Troy today, you'll be hearing him and Councilman Thomas tomorrow on Radio Courtroom, WRD 96.1 FM. Tune in tomorrow, Saturday, January 7, from 1 p.m. until 3 p.m. Hear more from attorney Troy H. Wilson and City Councilman at Large, Isaiah Thomas. We're going to shift gears now and go to Dr. Molefe Asante. As I said at the beginning of the show, when you talk about the greatest African-centered scholar alive today, you got to be talking about Dr. Asante. Here's a man who is the force behind the Africology department at Temple University. Here's a man who has written at least 100 books. There's many folks who haven't even read 100 books, but Dr. Asante has written 100 books. So we're going to have him on today to talk to us about Kevin Hart. And you might say, well, why would a great, deep, profound scholar like Dr. Asante talking about something as superficial as Kevin Hart? Without further ado, my good friend and yours, for the next 10 minutes, Dr. Asante, the microphone is yours. As I pointed out, great scholar, local scholar, regional scholar, national scholar, international scholar, the greatest living African-centered scholar. Dr. Asante, why are you talking about Kevin Hart?
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. I'm really happy to be on the show and certainly to come after these two fine presentations by Councilman Thomas and Attorney Troy Wilson. Let me just say that Kevin Hart is actually a spark for the conversation that we're going to have. But it's a spark because what happened was that a few years ago, he had made the statement that the ancient Egyptians were Black people. And of course, he had a show that was coming up in Egypt. And so many of the Egyptian people started writing on social media that he should be kept out of Egypt because he is saying that the ancient Egyptians were Black people and that he's an Afrocentrist. And you know, I never thought of Kevin as an Afrocentrist, but the fact that the Arab population, some of them, said that he should be kept out of Cairo because of his beliefs about the ancient Egyptian people, I said that we have to talk about this and we have to support Kevin Hart because in this thing he's correct. The African people, first of all, we need to understand that in many ways we are the envy of the world, an envy of many people in the world because of the majestic achievements of Nile Valley civilization and the grandeur of the ethical and moral conceptions that our ancestors gave to the world. And also the notion of the relationship between men and women, where you had the original notions of matriarchy, which was not about being against men, but about the whole idea of the complementarity between men and women. So this envy of African civilization, and particularly the Nile Valley civilization, is something that people want to hold on to, when in fact, what I will show, and I will be also talking about this again on January the 22nd at 4 o'clock at the Malefiketi Asante Institute at 5535 Germantown Avenue, that in our history, we know that the first nation in the world was created by a Black man. His name was Menes, M-E-N-E-S. And most people, when you study in school, they don't tell you anything about Menes. I never heard about Menes when I was in school, not even when I was in undergraduate college. I didn't hear about Menes. But Menes was the first person to unite 42 different ethnic groups into one nation. And that nation we call today Egypt. But in the ancient time, the Black people called it Kemet, which means the Black nation. And let me just say this, because this is important. Imhotep, we hardly hear the name of Imhotep. We got a beautiful school here in Philadelphia that we call Imhotep. But Imhotep was the Black man who built the first pyramid. Well, he ought to be at the beginning of all history books, whether you're in China or England or Senegal or France. Imhotep built the first pyramid for the King Joseph, but you don't hear people saying Imhotep. In fact, we don't even we get confused. Who is the first human that the history books talk about? Now, I'm not talking about the Bible. People say we'll go back to Adam, but Imhotep is the first multi-dimensional human in the world, and he was a Black man. And I'm saying to you, just because he was black and just because Menes was black may very well be one of the reasons why races of any stripe and wherever they are do not want to honor the blackness of the people who created that civilization. I just want to, I know I only have 10 minutes, so let me just take a couple of minutes to say a couple of things that are very important, and I'm going to establish this in more detail probably when I talk for about an hour or so on the 22nd. Look,
in fact, Dr. Santa, before you wrap things up, you got about 7 more minutes. But before you finish with your final 7, tell us again about January 22nd.
January 22nd at 4 p.m. At 5535 Germantown Avenue, I will be explaining the blackness of the ancient Egyptians. And this will also be on YouTube, streamed at 4 p.m. If you go to Molefe Kete Asante Lectures, you will see it at 4 o'clock. If you go to YouTube at that time, you'll see it. Now, let me take 2 minutes. The biggest problem was the invasion of Egypt. The invasion of Egypt was perhaps one of the most phenomenal things that happened. Egypt was invaded by the Hyksos, by the Assyrians, by the Persians, by the Greeks, by the Romans, by the Arabs, by the Turks, by the Mamluks, by the Albanians. I mean, Muhammad Ali, for example, leader of Egypt, was an Albanian. By the French, Napoleon came there thinking he was going to be a pharaoh. The English, and so forth. In 1952, Gamal Nasser overthrew the figurehead king that the English had set up, and he became the leader of the country. But the idea behind all of this is that the Arabs did not come to Egypt until 639 AD, this era. If you go back to the building of the pyramids, you're talking about 2500 BC. So there are no Arabs, there are no Hyksos even in 2500 BC. When the invasions happened in Egypt that really changed the character of the Egyptian people, that was much later. We had already built the civilization. We had already built the temples. We had already built the great tombs underground. We had already built the canals and so forth, you see? So part of what happened when Kevin Hart says that ancient Egyptians were black people is because he was citing the truth. And one of the biggest people is Herodotus, a Greek writer in the 5th century BC, said the ancient Egyptians, he said not the ancient, he said the Egyptians are black-skinned people with woolly hair. Black skin with woolly hair. You can't find a European like that, and you can't find the original people, of any of these countries like that. This is a black person. Now, I will give you more evidence when I speak with you on January 22nd. Michael, I'm so happy that you allowed me to say these few words.
Well, and I appreciate you not only saying some powerful words, but you are right on time. But we want to give you a couple more minutes. I just want to follow up. I was going to play the devil advocate. You touched on it. If what you say is true, why do the people in Egypt not look like you, me, and Kevin Hart? You talked about 639 when the Arabs arrived. Just elaborate upon that.
Yeah, when the Arabs arrived, they arrived because the black people had invited them in to help them throw off the Roman occupation. The Romans had occupied Egypt after the death of Cleopatra. When Cleopatra died, the Romans came and took over the country, and they basically were in charge of the country for almost 400 or 500 years. So now you get you already had the Greeks running the country for 300 years. Now you got the Romans running the country for 300 years. Then you get the Arabs. The Arabs came over and they stayed. They built the city of Cairo. That was the beginning of the Arab era. They built the city of Cairo, and then they stayed, and then they exercised their authority throughout the country. So much so that they start changing, the people start changing the way they look, because it's almost like if you look at America today is not what it was 500 years ago. when you had the Native American population. Now you got a European and a Black population. This was different from what it was when it was the Native American indigenous society here. The same is with Australia. In Australia, you had a Black continent. But now if you go to Australia, you see white people. So this is the basic, I call it subterfuge hosts. In other words, these are subterfuge societies that come in and go get into the original societies and take over their history, take over their culture, take over their language, and that kind of thing. So part of what we're going to be pointing out was that the Arab influence in Egypt was from Arabia. The Arab population is not indigenous to Africa. The Arab language is not indigenous to Africa. The Arabs came from Arabia, it came over into continent of Africa and into the first Black country that came into was Egypt. And so that's why we began to get this difference and change. I've been to Egypt maybe 15 times. And every time I go, it's always interesting to see that it seems like the country is getting less Black, but yet you still find Black people throughout the country, and particularly from Komombo all the way down to Abu Simbel. But right next to Egypt is Sudan, which is one of the Blackest countries in the world. So it's very, very fascinating about how people who have taken over the civilization of Egypt have tried to change the nature of the knowledge about Egypt. But I think we're fighting back and we're winning.
Dr. Asante, I'm supposed to be a professional TV host, but I'm like a curious student. I'm taking notes from your brief lecture today. I got a page worth of notes. In our final 30 seconds, Dr. Asante, tell us again, for those who didn't get it, what's going to take place on January 22nd?
January 22nd, I'm going to give, hopefully, one of my finest lectures on the Blackness of the ancient Egyptians. And I'm going off of the notion that the current Arab Egyptians are demanding that Kevin Hart, who once said that the ancient Egyptians were Black, is an Afrocentrist. And he shouldn't have said that, so they don't want him to perform in Egypt. And I'm going to be speaking in support of his thesis, because his thesis is correct. But I will give evidence from antiquity, and it will be a very powerful presentation.
Folks, as Dr. Asante pointed out, January 22nd, Molefe Kete Asante Institute, 5535 Germantown Avenue. Check it out live or check it out on YouTube. Dr. Asante, I would say that you're a scholar, but that's the waste of words. We all know you're a scholar, the leading scholar, the greatest African-centered scholar. Dr. Asante, thanks for joining us. And by the way, folks, tune into my radio courtroom show tomorrow, Saturday. We'll have Dr. Asante on talking more about this. Dr. Asante, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for spending time with us.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael. Bye-bye.
All right. And folks, in our final 30 seconds, I want to give a big shout out to City Councilman Isaiah Thomas, Attorney Extraordinaire Troy H. Wilson, and our most recent guest, you heard the great Dr. Molefe Kete Asante. I got to thank our producer extraordinaire, Roland, for putting up all the information about how you can follow up on the lecture by Dr. Asante and the seminar taking place by Troy Wilson, Isaiah Thomas, and myself. Folks, if you have any questions about anything you heard today and need more information, email me, michaelcordx@gmail.com. michaelcordx@gmail.com. And again, Roland put things up. Folks, we've run out of time. I'm going to end this show like I end every show. It goes like this. Think Black, I'm out.